Hi, Claire. Welcome back to Health and Hot Topics. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Hey, Grace Ann, how are you?
I'm doing great. So I'm really excited to jump right into the pregnancy just chronology that we're going through again. We're now in the second trimester. Baby is growing. Things are happening. I think we were talking last time about how it gets more and more exciting the farther along you get. So I think the more we do these, the more fun they'll be because there's more to talk about too.
Definitely, definitely. I had a ton of fun helping you research all this. I learned a lot, and then I kind of, backed up a lot of what I've already known.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I just want to start off with we're in the second trimester. We're starting at about week 14, 15 or so, depending on where people draw the line. It's often referred to as like the golden period of pregnancy. I don't really know if there's like a very specific trimester that's always better for people. I have heard from friends that they have, their second trimester is the best. I've heard from some people third trimester. Is it totally dependent on mom?
I would say, like, it's kind of a little bit dependent on mom, and a lot of it, I guess, is kind of whether or not she's done with having morning sickness, because a lot of moms, they end, towards the beginning of the second trimester, their morning sickness is kind of subsiding. They're noticing their energy is kind of up a little bit. That fatigue is going to likely come back in the third trimester, but they're feeling better physically. You're noticing a lot more growth with your baby. You can actually see what's happening rather than what just feeling it. So I would definitely venture to say that most moms would claim it's probably when they feel the best, but I would say you're also probably a little bit right. It's dependent on mom of um how she's feeling physically and kind of where that those initial symptoms are ending.
Nice. And what makes this so critical for, why is this so critical for fetal development, basically? What's going on with baby? Just an overarching look. I know we'll dive deep into some of that.
So this semester or semester trimester, I'm so sorry. Um, that ex-college life in me, is kind of when we're seeing a baby undergo very noticeable growth spurts. We're seeing the major organs develop, or fully develop, and something really fun for mom and dad is the facial features are becoming more defined. So you can kind of see it becoming more human-like. Obviously, you and I both know that the baby's been human from the very beginning, from conception, but you can kind of actually see it take more of a human form in comparison to the first trimester, where we just kind of simply see the formation of major organs. I mean, that's we're actually seeing them be most of them are becoming fully developed at this point.
Nice. Nice. That's very exciting. And I'm sure too with future ultrasound appointments, they can be, examined a little bit better and making sure
Mm-hmm.
that they're developing properly. And that's important to note as well. What would you say, like, obviously baby is still pretty small. How much does the fetus grow during this period? And I guess how does the physical appearance start to change? You said they start to look more like a human. I know it's often a joke that like really, really young children, like babies, look a little bit like aliens. So, that's good. It's good that they're starting to look a little more like a human, but what other things are changing?
So again, this is a very like significant period for, the baby. They'll typically double in length and gain, I don't know the exact like statistic of how much like they're gaining, but this is when they'll gain a lot of weight. And we'll see like for physical appearance, this is when we see hair and fingernails kind of develop and come in. Again, your facial features are more defined, and your limbs. The limbs are now fully developed. So again, looking a little bit more like a human, more like a baby.
Nice. And around like when did they start to look a little bit more like facial features, more like a human-like characteristics do we see?
So pretty early on, we kind of see a little bit towards the end of the first trimester. Actually, is when we see around 12 weeks is when we see more developed facial profile, but we
Mhm.
don't see a lot of the more defined characteristics like eyebrows and wrinkles until about weeks 20 to 24.
How would you say the limbs and organs continue developing during the second trimester, and are there any major milestones in this stage?
So this is a kind of a big stage for bone development and movement coordination. We see those kind of become pretty evident, and these kind of allow mom to feel baby move, otherwise known as quickening.
What would you say is happening with, let's just say, the brain and the CNS system, like the central nervous system during this trimester?
So we see kind of a rapid development with the baby's brain and the central nervous system. So this rapid development allows for them to start controlling things like movement. And kind of we see some autonomic things happening, like the practice of breathing and ability to respond and react to certain stimuli, such as sound. And this kind of enters in the potential for a baby to recognize familiar sounds, such as mom's voice, caused by the maturation of baby's brainstem.
So I know that in the first trimester we talked a little bit about how babies have these like gills that they use to breathe through, similar to almost a fish, which is kind of crazy, but it makes a little bit more sense because they're in fluid. How do they make that transition from gills to lungs?
You're entirely right. They're kind of like a gill-like structure. So they go from what we see as a nearly solid organ to a hollow kind of structure organ that resembles what we have, that they contain the basics that are needed for breathing outside the womb, such as major airways or the bronchi, and beginnings of the tiny airway sacs known as alveoli. Um, and this is also when the baby starts producing a crucial substance called surfactant, and that's needed for lung expansion. And this is all happening between weeks 24 through 28.
What does surfactant do?
So surfactant, it's kind of a protein, and it's necessary for lung expansion. It's kind of a little bit difficult to really get into without getting kind of confusing, but that's the general function. It's helping. It's a protein that kind of helps the lungs expand. A protein substance.
That's very cool. How would you say the gastrointestinal system starts to function, and when does the fetus begin swallowing and absorbing the amniotic fluid?
So swallowing kind of marks the initial like function of the gastrointestinal system, and this is happening around week 12. So this is happening a little bit into the first trimester, but kind of really develops mainly within the second, with kind of absorption beginning around roughly 26 weeks. So it takes a minute for that to fully um, develop and start to gain full function. But again, the swallowing kind of marks the beginnings of it.
Nice. And with the kidneys, I'm sure like the organs are, some of them are working differently at different points, especially as the baby is processing fluids a little bit differently than it might would outside the womb. With the kidneys beginning to produce urine, like, what role does that play, and when do they start to do that? Like, when do the kidneys really start working?
So in weeks 9 to 12, that kind of marks the production of urine, which again, it's one of those things we kind of see it start at the end of the first trimester, but it really doesn't get into full development until the second. And so those weeks 9 to 12 mark the production of urine, so the beginning of functioning kidneys, and that ends up being a big contributor to the amniotic fluid surrounding the fetus that will ultimately play a crucial role in fetal development in multiple ways. So lung development, movement, all of that. So that
Wow.
kind of the urine plays a lot more than what we would really expect for sure.
Wow, I had no idea. That's really cool.
Mhm.
So I know a lot of people that will talk about, the father will talk to the baby to get to the baby to recognize the sound of his voice. We talk about how baby recognizes mom. There's all sorts of studies done on that, and I find them so fascinating. Like some people, have the baby listen to music and things like that. So when are we hearing that, no pun intended, but when are we hearing that the fetus is beginning to hear sounds from the outside world, and what does that process look like at this point?
So, at 18 weeks, is when roughly the baby can start to pick up sound waves as the ear structures, such as the cochlea, are developing, but it's not until weeks 22 to 24 that the baby can start to hear and recognize low frequency sounds such as mom's voice, heartbeat, and digestive sounds. So, kind of weeks 20 to 22 to 24 are when they can really start recognizing and fully, hearing the outside world. The further the auditory cortex matures, the better baby can process and interpret sounds.
So basically, the older the baby gets, the better it can determine, oh, that's mom, or oh, that's dad, or oh, I like this Mozart song. Like, oh, I've heard this one before, possibly,
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
The process of hearing and the nervous system kind of go hand in hand a little bit because the baby can hear, and so it's that stimuli, and so that kind of activates the CNS to, nearly probably a year ago, I saw a TikTok of a girl who was pregnant, and she was like towards the end of her third trimester, she was about to give birth, and she dropped like a cup, and she felt the baby kick because it
Hmm.
startled the baby. So funny enough, yeah.
Interesting.
They
Huh.
they respond to the further like along you get, the more that their auditory cortex has matured, the more that they're kind of able to respond. And so it's like us like, oh, getting spooked by, a door slamming or something like that. So they're mature enough at that stage to respond to stuff like that. It's really cool.
Wow, that's really cool. With connecting the auditory system to the nervous system with just how its reflexes are, being made, like you were explaining with that story, like how is it developing in this trimester, and when are they seen to have these reflexes? Is that early on, or is that like mid second trimester?
This is all happening around week 16 in terms of brain development. The brain stem, so for those who don't know, it's responsible for autonomic vital functions such as the heartbeat and breathing. That's nearly completely developed by the end of the second trimester, and it's one of the crucial things for the CNS. And the cerebellum will now take control of the movement, allowing for more coordinated limb movements and muscle control. And again, this is happening around week 16. So a lot of those reflexes and such, they're all kind of, they start at week 16, but again, continue to further grow as the gestational period goes on.
And what kind of main reflexes are we seeing? Like reflexes are just movements that we're seeing from the baby in this stage. What are they like? Are they moving around a lot, or is this just kind of like just a twitch every now and then?
So the main movements that baby's kind of doing is they're kicking, they're rolling, they're stretching. They're really getting adjusted with their newly, developing CNS and their reflexes. So this is pretty significant this trimester because it's kind of telling mom and her doctors that the baby is not only growing on track, but their nervous system is correctly developing and that their muscles are, developing as they should be. And you could definitely say that a lot of people say that baby is practicing their movements, but that could be a correct term, but really this is baby not really fully consciously testing out their motor skills by moving their limbs, which mom can feel like kicks and rolls and stuff. It's definitely soothing experience for mom because it can kind of say like, oh, hey, I'm still here, I'm good, you don't have to
Oh,
worry.
that's
It's
very
really
sweet.
sweet.
And
Yeah.
I've heard this before as well with babies and kicking. Like it's often heard that, once mom lies down to go to sleep, baby starts moving around a little bit more. Is it because it's kind of like he's being rocked as she's walking around, and so he's a little bit more sedated with his movements? Is that kind of why, or is it just like the way she's laying? Do you happen to know?
How I'm not fully sure like what the exact, I guess it'd be like the exact science or the exact reasoning behind that. It could definitely that could be a really good explanation of kind of, babies being again, like you said, rocked, and so they're being soothed. And then once they're
Hmm.
not, it's like, oh, a lot of moms say, oh, it's just, it's payback for, whatever thing. It's like, oh, well, I'm trying to sleep and the baby's kicking my bladder, payback for me drinking coffee earlier. Although you're not technically supposed to, but yeah.
I guess talking now that we're kind of mentioning mom a little bit too, what impacts for her? What physical changes is she noticing as she's moving into this next trimester?
Most significant changes that mom is going to be noticing are their physical. So you'll see her increase in belly size. There, she'll start to get stretch marks. The her hands and feet will swell. Her One of the initial symptoms is an increase in appetite. Well, this is going to keep increasing. Um, Her breast size will obviously kind of start to increase more here as she prepares to breastfeed. And again, the fatigue is going to decrease, but that's likely to switch at some point within the um, third trimester. Most postpartum moms say that this is the most physically comfortable time within pregnancy. So I know we talked about that a little later.
Right, which that kind of does make sense. And I'm sure a lot of it is their body being like, okay, we're getting used to this. It's not as new. We're adapting a lot. I mean, your body is made for it, but obviously the transition is a lot. Um,
Yes, the hormones
going
are like all over the place.
all over the place. Um, looking a little more nitty gritty. We don't do this a ton on this show, but just because I try and keep it kind of broad. But just since I feel like this is more of a deep dive series, can we just talk about the placenta and the amniotic fluid? I'm just really curious. So, how does the placenta continue to evolve and support baby during the second trimester? Like, is it changing? Obviously, the baby sac that it's in grows, but what's going on?
Yes. So, the baby or the mom's placenta will, again, like you said, it'll grow and develop with baby, and it's going to start to develop a like a intricate network of villi or finger-like projections that will maximize surface area for nutrient and oxygen exchange. This is accounting for babies' rapidly increasing needs for nourishment and waste removal. The growth of the placenta happens alongside mom's uterus. This expansion ensures the placenta is supplied with enough maternal blood throughout the pregnancy. So it is really cool to see how like all the parts of the mom's body is really working together to support the
That's
baby.
amazing. I love how even down to the smallest detail, it's like these tiny little villi, like these tiny little like finger-like surface things are just working to, promote nutrients and oxygen for baby. I think that's just so fascinating, and it's amazing at this level of the way it is.
It
Um,
is really cool. Really, really cool.
So I am kind of curious, are there any specific genetic milestones that we're looking at? I know that they can test a little bit for genetics. They test, or they kind of like look for abnormalities with ultrasounds. Is there anything that we can see that's a little bit more apparent if there is a problem in this trimester? Can we see that yet?
Yes. So kind of we'll mention this a little bit more later, but the 20-week fetal anatomy scan will be able to tell us quite a bit and some other testing. But normally at this stage, we can see a lot of the common trisomy syndromes. So Edwards, Down syndrome, a lot of those, again, trisomy syndromes are going to be detected at this stage. And a lot of neural tube defects, so spina bifida, those can kind of be seen and tested for and screened for alongside conditions that can be indicated by family history. Cystic fibrosis can be seen, but that's not normally something that's tested for unless there's a reason for it to be tested for. So a little more on the screening. So there's a multi-marker blood test, so the quad screen. Again, the 20-week anatomy scan, and then if there's need for it, a further diagnostic testing such as an amniocentesis could be needed if screenings come back abnormal, which obviously we don't want to, but those are kind of the little bit of screenings that we look at to see what's really going on with baby at a deeper level, which is
Interesting.
really cool that we can do that now. That I find that absolutely fascinating.
I do too. And I think that, how would you see this playing a role in the pro life movement argument of, oh, well, my baby has trisomy 18. We've seen that before in the news, and it's almost seen as more merciful to abort the baby. What would you say to that?
I would say the most generic pro-life answer to this is that
That's
despite that trisomy 18, that baby is still worthy of life. They're still compatible with life. They can lead a nearly normal life. Obviously, some of the more severe ones, they're going to need round the clock care, but it's that doesn't necessarily make them not worthy of living in general. That's kind of how I would, that's the pro life response. And that's probably very generic, but that's, I mean, that's just the bold truth of it is they're human just as much as we are. And they deserve the right to life just as you and I do,
Mm-hmm.
despite, their disabilities.
Right. And I see it too as, even if you know the child probably won't make it, the test can always be wrong. And even if the
That
test
too.
is 100% right, that child still deserves a right to live. And you can at least have memories of being with that child and spending time
Hmm.
with that child before, they pass away. And it would be natural and the child doesn't have to, endure the pain and the trauma of abortion. I don't know. I feel like that is an important distinction that people seem to think that abortion is the more merciful route for mama and baby, but I agree with yours. Like, even if you say it's the generic pro life response, like, it's generic for a reason. Like, it is an unborn living human being, and that doesn't make it any less of a valid response. How would you say, going back a little bit to the genetic and environmental factors of baby developing, are there any, like, how do the various environmental factors like stress, working out, diet, exposure to toxins, whether that's like stress toxins or literal toxins like in our soaps or in the air, how does that impact baby's development during the second trimester?
So, an inadequate intake of essential nutrients such as iron, folate, iodine, so all these, essential things that baby needs to grow and develop properly, and, vitamin D as well, can lead to developmental delays, impaired brain function, birth defects, all, low birth weight, like all those kinds of just things that you would generically see of a not developing baby. Overeating is something that kind of a lot of people don't realize, but it is very much so easily done. It can lead to an excessive fetal growth and complications such as gestational diabetes. Increased cortisol or stress levels can impact growth and lead to preterm delivery. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't work out, because that kind of can be like not an indicator, but can be an equivalent to stress. Always like recommend working out as much as possible when pregnant. It's very good for baby, but unnecessary stress can again impact growth and lead to preterm labor, or yeah, which is why people with very high risk pregnancies, they say to decrease stress levels because it could lead to delivery early. And then toxins can lead to a risk of low birth rate and most commonly cause developmental delays. So there's, again, like you mentioned, all those different toxins, they all kind of have a different sort of risk, but those are the more common, like the low birth rate and the developmental delays are kind of the more umbrella of what they do
That
or
makes
what they
sense.
cause. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have heard it's very good to work out. Some people are afraid that they'll damage the baby, but I think, if you're working for basically the biggest workout of your life, I think it makes sense if you're going to strengthen your pelvic floor of all things because you have to push out a child, you know?
Yes.
If you know you're going to have a workout, like if you know you have a marathon in a year, like are you going to sit and rest until that marathon or are you going to train for it? You know what I mean? Like, I don't
Exactly.
know. That makes sense to me, but I also was always like, is something too much? Like, I'm sure there's a moderation of working out that
Yeah.
is a healthy amount because you're right, it is a form of stress that the baby can experience. As we're finishing up looking at the second trimester, a lot of mothers do the 20-week ultrasound just to check up on things. What are they looking for in that, and what can this tell us about different aspects of fetal development at this point around 20 weeks?
So at the 20-week anatomy scan specifically, the ultrasound tech and the doctor are mainly looking at the baby's organs, like their major organs, their brain, heart, spine, kidneys, stomach, etc., and facial features to ensure proper development and identify any birth defects. So, um, cleft lip, congenital heart defects, spina bifida, facial features can kind of identify Down syndrome, So it's kind of really the umbrella of what they're looking at are just those major organs just to make sure everything's developing properly and that there's nothing that they can't immediately see that needs to be taken care of.
Got So, as we're wrapping up to moving on to the next trimester, the last and third trimester, which our viewers and listeners will hear about next week, where are we looking ahead to? How is the fetus preparing for birth and after these pivotal developments in the second trimester?
So once the biggest thing that they kind of do or that baby will kind of do to prepare is be in the correct position. I mean, they have to be head down, and that once they'll know they had surprisingly enough they know when it's time, and sometimes they're a little stubborn. We all know this. They kind of come at their own rate. Um, but I mean, that'd be the biggest thing that they do to prepare. It's really interesting how you can kind of tell when she's about to give birth. Her stomach will get really low because baby is moved further down the pelvic floor. So they'll do that. That's the biggest thing they do. Once all the major organs are developed, they'll make sure they're ready to go.
He's
They
cooked
still
and
try
ready.
to. Yes, they're nice and cooked. They're done in the oven.
They're done in the oven. Well, we will finish up this really fun and incredible series next week. Thank you, Claire, so much for coming on. You guys can follow her at Claire Adorn on Instagram. And be sure to follow her and her education medical journey. She's going to be an amazing doctor.
Thank you. I
For coming
appreciate
on
that a
Health
lot.
Top.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Grace Ann.